Okay, everybody, welcome back. Today we are hitting lecture number 5. I believe we did 4 last time, which is good. Okay, good. So number 4 was to get you going on the first assignment, so you should be doing the first assignment, hopefully. Maybe the second or the third by now as well. So today I am going to cover some basic stuff, and then I'm going to get into the concept of image maps, and then I'm going to get talking about CSS and how that fits together. So today we're going to take a slight leap forward in terms of concepts if you're brand new to this. Otherwise, maybe you won't be as bored if you're not brand new to this. So we'll see how it works out. This one doesn't necessarily correspond to any of the assignments. This lecture is sort of an overview of some things I'm going to hit in a lot more detail. So no real examples, hands-on examples today. Instead, I'm going to give you a bunch of concepts, and then next week we'll do more implementation, I should say. But I have to give you the basic concepts of certain things, and then we'll put it together. Because hopefully I want to get to the point where we're working on examples and stuff, which is a little bit more interesting, I would say. So, at least interesting for me. I don't know. All right. So it would not be a class in HTTP or HTML and CSS without talking about HTTP, which is the protocol that's being used for the communication. So when we talk about URLs, most people are familiar with the concept of a URL, which is standing for a Uniform Resource Locator. Works through HTTP protocol. This is the missing Linux lecture for those people who haven't had Linux or Unix and don't know anything about this, who are totally brand new to the field. The interesting thing is most of you guys have heard this terminology and things because you're users of the internet. So anyone who's ever used a web browser knows about a URL. So I'm going to show you a little bit, I'm going to breeze through it because I'm going to assume you probably have a background in this, but I'm going to show you a few things that you might not be familiar with. Just, usually just the jargon, I would say, is probably the interesting part. So through HTTP, we get posts and we get sending and receiving and all the functionality that's happening in the web browser. The web browser doesn't do anything. All the web browser does is take the HTML text, formatted text, and make it look good for you. That's pretty much what the web browser is doing. The protocol that's running is the HTTP Hypertext Link Protocol. Manages the text links used to navigate the web and ensures web browsers correctly process and display the images, the tags, and such of that nature. So the URL, in terms of its concept, has a format to it. And a lot of people actually don't really even realize it. It's kind of like telephone numbers and social security numbers. They all have a format to it, actually. The first 3 characters of a social security number is the state in which you got it in. The second 2 have something to do with the city and also the location. And then the third is a unique, it's a numbering system by the state. So it's kind of interesting how that works together. Well, URLs for the internet have the same kind of format to them as well. They're all linked to IP numbers, and the IP numbers are associated with groups or trunks that are separated out. If you take a Linux class, you can kind of see how that sort of works. But the concept of the domain name, which is kind of the base of having to remember, words instead of numbers, makes the URL a little bit easier. The URL actually does have the same syntax to it, so as an example here, the host refers to the computer system where it's being accessed by the remote computer. Host portion of the URL is usually the www or World Wide Web. We have some URLs that don't start out www, actually, which is kind of interesting. But the host itself might be FTP, www might be something else, actually. So when we talk about the domain name, what we're looking at is the unique address that's going to be used to identify the computer on the web. It consists of 2 parts, separated by a period. So this is the part I'm going to kind of breeze through, because you guys are familiar with domain names for the most part. The first part of the domain is usually text. Identifies a person or organization, such as bhacker or course or something. So the domain identifier is the last part of the domain. And that is going to identify the type of institution or organization. In the old days, most commercial was .com, and then we had .nets, and Now, if you think about it, we have .edus. So actually, that's kind of the quick and easy way of telling whether or not the company is real or not, or the school is real. If they don't have a .edu, they can't be registered as an educational institution. So Biz never really caught on at all. I don't really see too many BIZs. EDUs, comms, nets, orgs, government, everything associated with the government does have a GOV, and the military, the U.S. military has an MIL on it. So, and here's the big picture here, which is what I wanted to show you today on the sample URL. So we have the protocol is the HTTP, which is kind of interesting. If you leave it out, then you're not running through HTTP. So when you use file links on your images, on your hypertext and stuff like that, you're putting this HTTP in to say it's going through somewhere else. It's a remote location. So if you leave that out and just put the forward slashes in, or leave this out and just put a file name in here, it actually reads it as a proper URL because you're just putting this part in, the file name. So when you're creating your links, just keep this in mind. Also, this has to be identical. So if it's HTML instead of HTM, this link would not work actually if the file itself had an HTML extension on it. We do have directories in here as well. You can put directories in your Unix drive as well. The interesting thing about that is you have to change the file permissions as well if you're going to do that, so you can access information inside of it from a public perspective. The domain name here, this is actually the domain name. Here it's cdc.gov. Or itu.edu would be the domain name. So it's kind of deceiving because people are, what's your domain? You know, go to the domain. Well, it's really just the first part of it. It's not the whole thing. So, and then we have subdirectories. And actually, we know, hopefully we know by now, we don't have to actually put index.html in this URL. If we just left this part out right here and went to this particular directory, index.html will come up automatically for us. It's kind of like one of those conventions that we get when we establish websites with a public HTML directory. It's automatically looking for an index page, which is sort of built into the protocol, which is kind of interesting. Some of them also have like a www directories. And the funny thing is here, there is a www directory, or there's a public _HTML directory, but it's not part of the domain name. So this is sort of looked up. Actually, it is a lookup. So there's a domain name registry. So you can actually get your own domain name if you wanted to. And you can subscribe to one of these registries. What is it? It's a computer server out there that has a whole listing, and it's used as a domain name server. So when someone opens up their web browser and puts this URL in here, what ends up happening is it goes to one or two kind of a big servers, and then it filters down. So sometimes when it takes longer for a URL to actually load, a website to load, it's not necessarily what's on the page, it's the name lookup, because this has to get translated into an IP address. And somewhere out there, hopefully, there is a server that has the domain along with the IP address or series of IP addresses that are associated with that. Depending upon where it's located, it might actually take longer to actually bring it up. So a lot of people, when they get websites, they'll register the domain name with the company that they're getting the website with, and then the domain name service, not the registration, but the service is actually located right on the same server. Loads up faster. Doesn't have to be that way though. You can have it registered or have it on a server anywhere, and then change the location of your website and just reassign the IP address. And usually what they do is they call it a transfer. They'll transfer it from one server to another, because you want the domain lookup to run fast, essentially. And there's only there's a certification company that will actually certify it for you and establish it and register it, which is not too bad actually. It's only about, I don't know what the going rate is today, but it's under $100 a year or so, 5 years or whatever, however long you register it for. So then here's a more part of your Unix background for today. We have the concept of absolute and relative links. So an absolute URL refers to the full web page of the web page, full web address of the web page, or specific drive or directory. The relative specifies the location of the file relative to the location. So in your links, you can use, this is what would be considered the absolute. If I left out this part here, and just said, well, travel / something else, that would be relative. So a lot of people do relative kind of linking inside of pages instead of having to specify the entire location. Because what if this page moves? What if the link moves? And if it's relative, then it's easier to find the subdirectory, it's easier to find the page. So it's a little bit, it's kind of interesting. Most people haven't really thought very much about, well, what links do I want to use and URL names? Well, you can make it so your page or your website survives, you know, especially if you use relative links, because whatever subdirectory, images, whatever, and especially if you're producing something that somebody else is going to take and upload to their server. You know, you put together this nice little form and this application and you're trying to sell it or something. Well, it's going to be impossible to sell or impossible to support if someone has to go through and change all the links everywhere. So a lot of people use relative links instead of absolute locations for the most part. You can also hide web pages from search engines as well. So most people want to make them visible. So we have this metadata that we can put at the top of the page. It's kind of like people who put stuff on Craigslist or people that put stuff out there want it found. You know, when someone goes to Craigslist and types in, you know, MacBook computer, you know, and then you see all this Windows stuff that comes up. And then you look at the ad and on the bottom of it, it says, oh, MacBook Pro, MacBook computer, all these keywords, makes it searchable. Well, that's not really fair if you think about it, because people can just put everything they want. Well, that's actually kind of like what you're doing if you want to promote your website, because the more words that you actually put into the text, it doesn't actually have to show up on the page. You can just put the metadata in the file, like right at the header portion. And so when someone does a search, it goes through and says, oh yeah, this one says MacBook computer, but has nothing to do with MacBook computers. It just comes up. Well, you can do the opposite as well. You can hide it. So your website may include pages that you don't want to include in any search engine indexes. So for instance, you may have a page that stores personal information or data, and maybe not private enough to encrypt, but you don't want it to show up. Well, you can use protocols such as http-s. It should not be returned to a user who performs a search. So you're never, if you probably have not, you know, so all the years that you've been using the internet, hopefully you'll walk away today with at least one thing. I didn't know about that. So, this is probably one of the things. You'll never get an HTTPS showing up in any search result, which is kind of interesting. And S stands for secure, which means it's hidden from search engines, which means it doesn't matter what data you put on there, it's not going to show up. And so people go, well, what's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Well, the interesting thing is it's just added. There's an added layer onto the protocol. It's a different protocol, however, which is kind of interesting. You can support both on the same page. So you might experiment a little bit and type in HTTPS and go to a URL. Interesting thing is you may actually be able to use different features because some of the shopping cart functionality, some of the verification stuff, even some of the connectivity with internet databases and stuff runs through an S instead of the regular one. So it never shows up in search results. And so you can inform the search engine spiders that you don't want certain pages on your website or index to be placed by placing a file named robot.tx in the root directory of the web server that hosts your website as well. So if you put that in there, robots.tx, you can't get automatic search engines to kind of go and scam your site and do stuff with it. So it's kind of a protective mechanism. Technique's also called robot exclusion protocol. So you put that in there and you put the pages, certain pages that you want, the names of the pages, you list them out in a text file, stick it in there, you put that on your website, and then they're hidden, essentially. They're not going to come up. Otherwise, what ends up happening is HTTP protocol, the standard, not the S, will go through and search everything. So everything's sort of exposed, which is the concept, if you think about it. It's public. So usually the directory that all the stuff is stored in is called public_HTML, which means we're trying to make it public, which is kind of counterintuitive to go back and say, oh, no, we don't want it public. But some of the things you might have on there might be just internal web pages or something to the company. Now, just because you've put them in this robots file, or you're using HTTPS instead of the regular old standard protocol, doesn't make it inaccessible. It just makes it so automation doesn't work on it. So this brings us, and now here's another part. So some people may not have known about the robots.txt file. They may not have known about the differences between HTTPS and HTTP, which essentially is going to give us our secured server interface. And it's not a separate server. It's a protocol that's different. So the files are the same. You're just accessing it through an S. So sometimes if you're running through a shopping cart, or you're doing something, a school website or something, look at the URL, see if you see the S. If you see the S, that means they're taking some extra security precautions. They're probably putting digital certificates, and they're using SSL, or they're using something that's going to help the security component. Most users will never even know the difference. So now we have HTTP/EQUIV equivalent attribute. So it's an attribute, and you're going to put this on your HTTP opening and closing tag when you're creating your page. And it's whenever a user wants to access a web page, either by using a URL in the browser's box or by clicking on the link, user's web browser will ask the web server for the web page, which it refers to as a request. So we have a request protocol that's associated with HTTP that is given by this syntax here. A lot of people have used the syntax before. I've cut and pasted and put it on the top of their documents and stuff. And it's a request protocol. It's an attribute that says this is going to be a request. So when the web server returns the user, it's called a response, which is how forms get processed, actually, with a request and a response, and sending and retrieving information. So one part of the response is the requested web page. So the request says, okay, request this. The response, here it is, sends it back through the web browser. So the response header is sent to the web browser before the web page is sent over in order to provide the information that the browser is going to need to render the page. So we see this used a lot in terms of mixing HTML code, requests and responses that are associated with scripting programs, anything that runs with a combination of different technologies. We'll see this being used to specify it's a request, which makes it easier. So the important pieces of the information in the response header is the type of data, or the content type that the server is actually sending, because we don't know what type, especially if it's data, if it's text, it's coming from output from a script of some sort. So this basically gives us our content type as well. So we'll see the HTTP equivalent in a lot of examples and things in terms of the concept. So, all right. So now what I'm going to do, and that was sort of the supplement to give you the Unix kind of background in lieu of taking a full Unix course. Those are the things that apply towards HTML and CSS. So now I have some miscellaneous concepts in terms of sound and also image maps, which are sort of interesting in terms of their application with HTML. And then I'm going to get into the concept of CSS. If you came in a little bit late, this is the track we're taking today. So adding sound to your website. Not such a good idea, actually, because adding sound can make your website a little bit distracting for the most part. So working with audio on the web, so audio can be compelling, can add greatly to the mood of the site, complete the experience. Problems with audio. Audio files can be extremely large. The longer it takes for your audio to load, the slower your website actually loads. Especially if you make it run in the background as the site comes up initially, it might make it unusable. You might also have copyright issues that might be troublesome, and audio can be distracting. Cross-platform audio is tricky. Especially with Windows files. You put a Windows media file out there, and the first thing that's going to happen is if someone's going to access it on a MacBook, the file's not going to load. It's not going to sound. The sound's not going to be the same. And you're going to say, well, didn't you hear the sound? No. It's not going to run. Besides, also, now modern day. In fact, for a while, a few generations ago, about 5 years ago or so, audio was all over the place. Now it's gone away because people have to turn their speakers off. You're sitting here right now, you go to a website and some big old music starts playing in the background. That's distracting. So you're going to mute your computer anyway. So why mute it? Just don't have the audio on your website. Not to say you don't want audio on the website. A lot of commercial websites are still doing this for some reason, which I don't know. I find it always distracting and irritating. So first thing I do is look for it. How do you turn that off? So types of audio files. If you're going to use audio, WAV is very large. MP3 is smaller, has good compression. Real Media RM is good, but it's a proprietary format. It's not supported on all platforms. MIDI, excellent file format, variety of quality. Not so good, sounds like computer tones. MIDI kind of syntax, synthesis, I should say. So incorporating audio into a web page, usually it's better these days to use a link. And actually, it's better to link to the audio than it is to actually load the audio on your local site. Only problem with that is the audio goes away. And then, it's like video, goes away. And then what happened? My link's broken. So, but it actually is a more copy-protected way of doing it, especially because you're not making a copy of something, you're just linking to it. So you're protecting yourself a little bit more. You can use an embedded tag. You can use a background sound tag, or bgsound tag, or use a CSS element. It's kind of like your options for audio. So linking to a sound file. So it's just like a regular link to a web page, but instead of using an HTML interface, you're using soundfile.wave, which is would be a relative link, an example of what I'm calling a relative link that would be located on in the current directory of your web page. So external reference to sound. The file plays when the user clicks on it, opens up another unspecified player. Then you're looking at browser defaults, because this isn't specifying a player. So rather than make it so that the customer or the user has to have something, let the browser do it. So your browser settings are going to specify that. Usually this fails. No one is going to set the file. Mostly, especially if it's brand new computer or something, the customer may not necessarily have any player established. And then the browser determines which program is going to be played, and so it makes it more cross-platform compatible because the browser is specifying that. But it's more chances for it to fail as well. In terms of using a background tag, don't do this. It's like the background of your website. So when the website loads up, it loads a background image. You can put sound out there too, so it loads it in the background. Not such a good idea. This is what irritates people, actually. So automatically loads when it plays a sound when the website loads up. Microsoft extension to HTML. No way to turn it off without programming it. So not quite a good way of doing something. And which kind of brings up an interesting point. Although this stuff is available to us, it may not necessarily be something you want to put on your website. So, but I'm going to have you do stuff in the assignments that may or may not necessarily be a good thing to do. So, I mean, just because, in fact, the first assignment you're using frames, not really a good thing to do these days, but it's nice to know about frames. So, well, sound, not such a good thing to do, but it's nice to know that you can do it. So, alright, so using an embedded tag here, we can embed the sound file. And if we're going to embed it, this is actually the more popular way of doing things these days. You can embed sound player plugins that go to a URL that actually bring it out, so the user doesn't have to install anything. It usually creates a component in the website, so you have to specify a height and a width. Put real player in there, put media, Apple, what is that? Apple's player in there. So it plays the music within a plugin inline or in the website. No predicting what player is going to be associated with it. Behavior is also unpredictable. Player may not load. URL might be bad. Player might be busy. Player might be slow. This is extremely slow, by the way, because it's loading something from an external source, bring it in to your website, and then loading it up. So it makes it run a little bit slower, I should say. Here's a sound example that will irritate everybody if you play it. It does all three, actually. If you cut and paste this code, stick it in a text file, load it up. You actually have to do more than that, though. You have to get the WAV files. So substitute in the names of 3 different files that are associated with a moo. Well, actually, it's just one. It looks like here's a MIDI, blue suede shoes. So put in your own audio files, and you can probably see how it runs. Essentially, demonstrating all 3 techniques. So that's everything you ever did, and believe it or not, that is everything you ever wanted to know about sound. There's nothing else to it. And another interesting thing is the video, done the same way. So audio, video, sound, all this fits into the multimedia category. Everything is going to use a plugin. You're going to either put the plugin in the page, you're going to link to it, so you go to it, or you're going to make the browser support it, which is basically your 3 different ways of doing it. And if the browser is supporting it, you have more likelihood for failure. If you're linking to it, you have more likelihood for the link to be gone. So there's pros and cons to all 3 of the different techniques. So now actually with HTML5, you can use YouTube videos and have basic support added to HTML to support multimedia. So it not only does it support multimedia in terms of video files, it supports audio as well. So it has a built-in functionality that's associated with a plugin type of behavior that loads the component and runs the component. Extremely easy, actually, to load video now. And actually, believe it or not, that's one of the best parts about HTML5. The only problem is not every browser supports HTML5. So you bring up, you create this new HTML5, and how do you know if you're using HTML5, really? You're just using the tags. If the tags work, then you're using HTML5. If not, you're using HTML4, because it's the new tags that have been added to the syntax. So if your browser is supporting it, and you write a web page that supports it, it works just fine. You take the web page, you load it in a non-compatible, and who knows what's going to happen. And, well, your entire website relied upon this video or this audio or something. And so you're going to have chances for failure. So it's been a little bit slow in terms of its adoption, because not everybody's on the same page with it. Not every browser is supporting it 100% at this point. In fact, Microsoft a little bit behind the times. So Firefox, Mozilla browsers are a little bit, Chrome a little bit more supportive of HTML5. Image maps. Another interesting concept that's very popular these days. So what is an image map? You're putting an image out on a screen, and you're going to map different regions of the image. So when you click on the images, it does something. The most popular thing these days has been, like, you know, the map of the U.S. and all the states are in different colors, and you put your mouse over it and you click on a state and it does something. That's an image map. You know, brings up, oh, these are all the zip codes, or this is all the shipping costs. Or I've also seen it used quite successfully with menuing systems. So instead of having, like, you know, a row of buttons, you put images out there. And you click on the images, and the images do different things. They don't necessarily have to be an action associated with the click. The image itself can change. In fact, that's the most popular thing, the overlay. So you put your mouse over it, and now the text was blue is now red or something. Create some really good dynamic behavior, all done in HTML, no scripting language needed. You use image maps. So what does the slide say? Image map allows users to navigate to different web pages by clicking on images. Problem is, you want to make sure your images are lightweight, because what you don't want is an image that's going to take too long to load. Your site's going to run very, very slowly, and it doesn't really matter how many image maps you have, it's going to be unusable, especially on a small device when you have very low memory, which actually mobile devices these days are better quality, better graphics, better images than the desktop computers, so that kind of has gone away as an issue, so you don't have to really worry about that. So an image map consists of an image that's divided into regions. So each region is associated with a URL, and then the regions are called hot zones. So you hot zone the regions so that when you move the mouse over, and it's the mouse, if you're doing it on a mobile device, it's going to be a touch sensor. It's going to work the same way, actually. It's automatically converted. In fact, that's the interesting thing about web development. Everything you're doing for a desktop is going to work automatically. So there's no extra programming for touch control. So image maps. You can open up a URL associated with each one of the regions by clicking on a hot zone with your mouse. And one of the most common uses of it is to create graphical menus that can be used for navigation. So here's an example of a website that has an image map on it. This is all an image up here. All this stuff are images. And they've mapped regions of the image, and I'll show you the mapping in a few minutes. So you click on it, and it changes the content in here. So can put images anywhere. And the other classic example is the picture of the United States or the country or something, and you click on it. It gives you some information. Makes for navigation, makes it really easy actually. So the image itself is stored in an image tag, so it requires elements. So the image map requires elements. So we have an image is the element that contains the source attribute associated with the name of the file, and then we use a use map attribute that's associated with it and assigned an ID and a name for the map element. So we assign it a use map, give it a name, and then we assign it IDs, and then we, in terms of the image, we map it, the regions associated with certain parts of the image to these different maps so we can perform different behaviors on them. So the map element specifies the mapping coordinates, which includes an ID and a name attribute, and has the same value as used in the image map element for the use map. So this image is going to use this map. And this map is going to have these regions that are specified. And these regions are going to have this ID that's associated with it. So we have the area, and we'll see this all put together in an example in a few minutes. So the area element is nested inside of the map, and the element that identifies the coordinates. So we have to have the coordinate system identified within the image so we can recognize what we're doing with the use maps is we're identifying the regions that we're calling these hot zones, so that when we click on the hot zones we have the desired functionality. So in terms of the image maps, you proceed the value you assign to the use map attribute, which is the value assigned to the ID and the name attribute of the map element in the image element by a number sign. So we have this hash sign here that's used to map the ID. The map element defines the coordinates used to create the images, maps hot zones, and then the area element defines the region within the image map itself, the map element. And let's see if I can get this a little bit bigger here. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So here's our image map example, where we have a, click on the planets to watch it closer. So we have a bunch of planets out there. So we have an image source, which is creating our image for us. And it's going to be planets.gif. And I'm going to specify the height and width. This is kind of interesting. You want to be able to specify the height and width of these images because you want to be able to predict the regions that are associated with it. So here we have a use map. It's going to be a planet map. And then we have the map identified as a map. The ID is planet map. The name is planet map. And then for the ID, we're going to have the area is going to be a shape, is going to be a rectangle, and these are the coordinates. And the alternative word we're going to stick on there just in case the map doesn't show up, or excuse me, the planet doesn't show up, the image is gone. That particular region is going to say sun on it. It's going to be, this picture is going to be like the global, the sky, or the solar system. Okay, there we go, the solar system, and we have the planets in the solar system. So this particular region specified by this rectangle is going to be marked as a sun, and then we're going to have the areas. There's going to be a circle here, and this is going to be Mercury, and these are the coordinates of the circle. So the region itself has different shapes associated with it, so we can kind of coordinate the area for which it's going to be clickable. And the area is nothing more than just defining the clickable area. So the reference here for this area, for this shape, is going to be load up sun.html. And then here we're going to load up Mercury and load up Venus. We've got two circles, we've got a rectangle. It doesn't all have to be the same in terms of its identification. So what we're doing is basically defining these different regions. When you click on the different regions, these web pages are going to pop up, essentially. We're going to link to them. Which is kind of a simplified kind of way of doing an image map. So what you're going to do, if you're going to do this for a menuing system, is put and the regions that you're doing here is relative to the image. So you're going to put the menu out there somewhere. And then for the menu, whatever this rectangle image is, within the rectangle image you're going to define the coordinates for the buttons that are in there, or for the components. It doesn't have to be buttons. It's an image. User can click on anything. if the area is defined and the shape is defined, when you move the mouse over it, the mouse will change into like the clickable kind of, you know, look, it's clickable kind of thing, or you can actually use the mouse hover and use the mouse events and highlight something, change the color of something, raise it, I don't know, do some sort of special effect on it to make it seem like a menu item, or seem like a menu selectable item. So it's all in the appearance of how you're designing the image map that's going to give you that functionality. There's no way of actually just saying, hey, you know, put a menu out there and give me the menu items. It doesn't kind of work that way, which is kind of interesting. So see the coordinates here. You move the mouse over the image and you look at the status bar to see how the coordinates change. If you're going to essentially, you know, map this out. So here's a reference here, image 2, and the image source is going to be planets, and the map itself, the width, the height, is going to be essentially specified. So to see the coordinates, this is the one that's going to be for clicking on the planets to watch it closer. So if you download the code, put it into a text file, you'll have to get the images themselves though in order to see it. What you should see though is on the bottom of the status bar. You should see it. So here's ones that uses the control, so uses the mouse to control the environment. So here's a mouse over.htm. And actually I'm gonna see if this actually works because I haven't run this example in Centuries. So I want to make sure that the mouse over. So I'm going to cut and paste this code. Because remember before I said it's nice to be able to use the mouse over functionality to say if the mouse is over a particular area of the image, then highlight something or do something. Because this is going to be something that you're going to want to play around with in terms of menus. So I'm going to copy this code. This is on slide number 35. I'm going to put it into a text Wrangler document. And people on YouTube have been calling me on this text edit comment that I made. Okay, so the default format for text edit is rich, so RTF, rich. So you don't have to use the default. You can change it to plain text, and you can use text edit for editing web pages. I like text Wrangler. That's why I use it. I'm not really a fan of edit text because I like the colors that I get with this. So the color coding and stuff. So just so that nobody asks me again, and well, unless they're listening to this video, they're not going to be able to know that I've answered this. But I've put up a couple comments already on that YouTube site. You know, all right. Sorry, I said something about text edit. Text edit will work. So, all right. So I'm going to save this one here. I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'm going to call it mouse over. And if I click on mouse over, I'm going to have this thing here that comes up underneath. So okay, so I don't have the image here. Let's take a look here at the image. I'm sorry? Yeah, I know, it still shows it. And if I click on it, mouse over, mouse out, on click. So let's see if I don't know if it oh, it will. Okay, yeah. That's good. Well, modern day blockers, the reason why I wanted to test this out was because some web browsers are now actually blocking a lot of this behavior because they don't like pop-up windows, they don't like mouse kind of controls. But if you put an image in here, the reason why I'm demoing this is to make sure it works, but basic mouse effects. So if you put an image in there, and the image here is going to be a PNG file, if I click on the image, it should change the file. Mouse over, mouse out should change the image here. So if I put in, actually, let me see. I'm just going to download a couple of images here, PNG images. New tag here. Let's see. Let's just go here. Whoops, I probably should have had some PNG images on my computer. Here's some. Let's just save this one. Save images. Just put it on that. Oh, it's not PNG. Well, I can change it. Well, okay, so the concept is save a couple of images, put it on the desktop. What ends up happening is when you put the mouse over, document.thebutton.source is going to be 1. Click me on PNG. You move the mouse out, and on the event, the document.source is going to change to the click me up PNG. So you can see the dynamic event occurring, which leads me into the concept of document and the hierarchy of the elements. So the mouse control works with the hierarchy, the document object model, DOM is what they call it. And Firefox has a slightly different DOM model than Internet Explorer, slightly different than Chrome, which is kind of interesting. So the models themselves are very similar. There's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of differences. This is pretty standard, however. The document element, the window element, the mouse, the sources themselves. So on the click, it brings up an alert box. This is not JavaScript. This is just a regular old alert box that's supported by the browser. And the image source itself, the source is going to be this, starting out with this image. The name is going to be the button. So let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys see what I'm talking about. This is the element, the button, for which the image source itself is going to be changed. So it's kind of interesting to see the effect. Actually, you know what? Let me just take 2 more seconds here, and I'll get another image here. Shouldn't, I'd have to change it in the code though. The JPG should work just fine. Yeah, so I'm going to put here test 1. I'm going to call this one PNG. Test 1 PNG. This other one should work. Actually, let me just take a look real quick here. Whoops. I saved it out here. So I've got images. Oh, here, I'll just call this. I'll just leave it alone. So this one's going to be images. JPEG is as long as the image is a supported file format, it should work. So JPG, and then this one here, I called it what? Test 1. And I'm putting in the relative links here, which is good. Very good. So I have to have them loaded at the same location as the HTML file. And it's not going to load. Oh, there it is. Okay, so we see the effect actually because, well, let me change the, here, I'll make it look a little bit better. Let's make it 300 by 300. 300 by 300 because it was kind of squished before. So if we make it 300 by 300, let me save it here. And for those of you who didn't catch what I just did a few minutes ago, I cut and pasted, I put the code into a text file. I've changed the names of the images to match the two. This is working because I have this all located at the same location. If I change the location, I would have to actually put in the URL here, but I'm just using the flat location, which is the desktop. So if I double click on mouseover.htm, if I put my mouse over, the event is actually changing the images for me. So I have the dice and this is actually kind of cool. So with the basic mouse movements. Now if I click on it, that's when I get hey, because that's what my alert box is showing. No JavaScript, nothing is being used here. So my point that I was trying to make, I don't know, a long way of doing it, was this could be a menu. And on your page you've got the menu, let's say on the top, or you've got it on the side. And what you're doing is going to put an image map in there. So at a particular coordinate, circle or a particular shape and in a particular location in the image, when you click on the image, it's going to bring up a website, or it's going to act as a link, essentially. When you put the mouse over, it can highlight the particular area, change the particular area, do something interesting to make it look like a clickable link, so that when you click on it, something happens. And then a nice way to create a pretty dynamic, interesting looking menu system. What you don't want is a bunch of buttons. Or you want you can put images on buttons and put a bunch of buttons out there, but that's kind of like a really old style way of doing it. A lot of people are using the image map concept because it makes it a little bit more interesting. However, the caveat to that is make sure your images are small. If you put a huge image out there and you're mapping the entire page with this image or something, it's going to take too long. So your user is going to sit there and go, well, how come my image isn't loaded yet? So, all right, that was actually kind of a fun example. The image map here is actually probably worth demoing as well. I'd have to change the image around. Let's take the see the coordinates here. Let's take a look here. I'm going to save this one here to a text file. Let's see, change this one here to images.gif. Now that I have images loaded, I can just change the names here. Oops, that's JPEG. Let's call this a JPG. Let's see. I like the 300 by 300. And test 2. Oops, wrong one. Wrong one. Test 2. Oh, and I forgot to put. And this one's not going to do it. The status bar is not going to show in here because I have it in a text editor. Hold on one second. Yep, thank you. Okay, see on the bottom, let's see, make this a little bit bigger. Oops, I can't know if I can get everything all in one. Yes, I can. Here we go. See on the bottom where it says so right now it says 149, 191. And now it says 185. All the coordinates are changing. What this is doing is putting in the status bar the coordinates of where I'm clicking. So what's going to end up happening is when you start using image maps, you're going to go, well, how do I know it's 200 by 200 or 300, 146 by 192 for this? Because let's say, for example, I want to click on the eyes. Let me get a little smaller here so you can sort of see this in one big frame here. I could make it so when I click on one of the eyes, like here's the left eye and here's the right eye or something. Something else happens. This is how I'm going to define my maps. And what you see down here on the bottom are the coordinates that are, oops, let's see, that are coordinates that are changing. On the bottom of the screen here on the status bar. So the code that's making that happen is the is map with, or excuse me, it's essentially automatic for the web browser itself. That's actually going to do it for you. There's actually no specific code that needs to be done for that. And it is still supported, which is what I wanted to do, to actually kind of make sure that that still works. Because so some of these examples are on the old side. I just wanted to make sure that they were still functioning. So that is going to function automatically for you. It's behavior you're going to get automatically with the mouse. You can users actually can turn that off, and you can modify. And depending upon your web browser, you may not necessarily see the status bar on the bottom in terms of the image. So as long as you're putting the image map in there, it should identify it though, whether or not it shows up on the bottom or not. So let's just take. While I'm here, I'll just go ahead and run through this one as well. So this is the one that has the planets on it. Going to need a huge image. Let's see. I believe I'll put the smiley face out there again. Hello. Images.jpg. JPG. So we get the planet here. I'm going to have to make the planet pretty big. It's not really a planet, it's a smiley face. But I'm going to make it 600 by 600. Just so I have something to map here. And let's see what we got down here. We got the planet rectangle. We have a rectangle defined here, a sun. So if I click on these particular regions, if I can click, actually maybe I should make this 300. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can find the clickable regions. It should open up the web pages for me that are associated, but the web pages don't exist, so it should hopefully give me an error of some sort is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to run this to see if I can see the errors. So I'm going to call this one test3.html. Save it right here. Oops. Let's see. I'm just clicking on, oh, let's see. Hello. Oh, there we go. Finally found one. The sun is gone. Not quite sure where the sun is. I'm just clicking on the image to find the hot spots. Hello. There's no hot spots. Well, I found the sun a few minutes ago. But my hot spots aren't identified correctly. So, yep. There's the sun. So, anyway, that's what I was expecting. So you'd have to define your hotspots correctly. How are you going to find the hotspots correctly? Well, load the website up, move the mouse around, find the coordinates. So if I went back to this one over here and said test number 2 here, and I said, well, if I want this one to be 201 by 136, and then I come over here, it's kind of the long way of doing it, and edit test number 3 to 201 by 136. Let's see. 0, 0. No, that would be the upper. So it's going to be the upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right coordinate system. So the sun is the one I was getting up there. So 300. What were those coordinates again? Coordinates were 201 by 160. No. Let me see. Hold on a second. I'm trying to get the eye to work. 201 by 139. 0, 0. Well, let's see if that. Ooh, that may not work, but let's see. Now I'm sort of curious. This is going to be the sun. Yeah, because it went 0. Oh, I got it on something. Okay, so one of them worked. One of those clicks I just worked on the eye worked. Not an exact science. So that's the way you're going to probably troubleshoot it if you're going to use this technique. So you're going to find the coordinates that you're interested in. Oh, okay, now it's working. So, alright, so I click on the eye, it's going to bring up the, well, we don't have this image doesn't exist. So the behavior is not going to work properly. Alright. So that is how image maps work. They do come in handy. So let's talk about style sheets, unless we have questions about image maps. But that's actually all there is to it. Putting the image out there, getting the on-click behavior. And the on-click behavior is nothing more than just an on-click is equal to an alert here. This is not JavaScript, by the way. This is just regular old on-click. It's not JavaScript. Yeah. The purpose of alert is to put, the alert puts up that alert box. It's kind of like the document window. It's just like JavaScript, but it's just that little window that said hey inside of it. It's just a, some browsers will block that. Not such a good idea nowadays. You can actually put up a window if you wanted to. Actually, I think a browser is going to probably treat it like a pop-up window. The alerts actually still work. And if I were to load this in my Internet Explorer, the alert may not actually show up. It's going to show up in Firefox, but it may not necessarily show up in Internet Explorer. So the behavior is a little bit unpredictable depending upon the security that's being placed on the browser. So some browsers might actually treat it like a, you know, something malicious. What ended up happening originally, people came up with all this functionality and said, hey, you know what, it's great, put up a box, do this, change the window size. And then people started getting a little bit malicious with it and saying, oh, let's create a virus out of here so all your windows are real small. And you know, let's just pop up a bunch of ads in these windows and stuff. And then browsers started avoiding all that functionality from working, turning it off. And so now people who write good websites, or you want the functionality, it doesn't work properly. So you know, you get this little status bar thing. Do you want to turn on pop-up windows? You know, because now the website's requesting to open up a new window, but the web browser's turning it off, but maybe it's a good website. So, which is kind of, you know, if people hadn't ruined the concept, probably would have you know, been a little bit easier for a lot of web developers these days. So, all right. So I also have a few other things I'm not going to show you today. We're going to talk about style sheets today, but there's a little bit more to HTML as well. We haven't hit everything yet, especially color, stuff like that. So, all right. So cascading style sheets. So this is the second part of the course. Actually, it's HTML and CSS in terms of the concept. Cascading style sheets separate the content and the presentation. So far what we've been looking at is putting them all together in one file. So we have inline versus document versus external. There's 3 different ways to using style sheets. They're cascading because one is going to override the other. So they're in a hierarchy. And then we have the subclasses or elements, components that we're defining. And then we have pseudo elements. So in terms of the concept, the introduction to styles and properties, to ensure future web page authoring separates out the definition from the elements in the document from how they appear. We can use an extension added to the HTML language, and extensions such as font as an example. Font is an element. We're depreciated with 4.0 to 1.0 in favor of CSS. Actually, the trend right now is take it all out of HTML, put it into a separate document, use the document for the formatting, which is, think of it like a style sheet, actually. So cascading and style sheet, what I mean by that terminology is like with Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, we have these style sheets that we add in that give us, you know, the type of font that we're using, the colors and things. So this is what CSS does for HTML. So cascading style sheets, standard set of www webs W3Cs for managing, designing, and formatting web pages in the web browser. So it's a single piece of CSS formatting information such as text, alignment, or font size, as referred to as a style. We can use inline styles. We've actually seen them already. When we say style of the paragraph is, you know, includes this font or something. We're changing the look and feel of the tags. So some of the style capabilities are giving you the ability to change fonts, backgrounds, colors, modify layouts that appear in the web browser. The web browsers themselves have style sheets as well, but they're last in the hierarchy. So every web browser actually, if you've looked at the properties of your web browser, you can change the font size and the background color and stuff. None of that stuff works unless the page doesn't specify it. If the page doesn't specify it, then all that stuff works, the last resort. So CSS information can be added directly to the documents or stored in separate files, shared among different multiple pages. Actually, people use a combination. The default or the proper way of doing it is put into a separate file and then include those files in each one of your pages. If you do that, then what ends up happening is you get automatic consistency among all of the different pages. So all of the pages have the same look and feel. The term cascading refers to the web pages and their ability to use the CSS information from more than one source. So we have CSS Properties. And what I'm giving is all the terminology because this is where you're going to get hung up when you start looking at examples. So the terminology for the property is the style. In terms of CSS property, we have 2 parts of the properties, and they're separated by a colon. And so the property, which refers to the CSS style, and the value that's associated with it or assigned to it, which determines the style's visual characteristics. So, you know, font, a colon, something that's associated with it in terms of the attribute. So together the CSS property and the value that is assigned to it are referred to as the declaration or the style declaration, declaring it. Here's an example. Color, colon, blue. So if you're sticking this in a separate file, it's a text file, just like an HTML file. Usually it's going to have a .css extension on the end of it, if you're going to do it that way. Or you can write the same tag and put it inside of the HTML file, if you want to. Or you can use a style tag and put it inside of the text that's inside of the HTML file. What you're doing is writing a bunch of stuff that looks like this. So color, colon, blue. So the property with the value. So this is what's referred to as a style declaration. And all you have is basically a bunch of style declarations in a CSS file. And so when you include the file, you're declaring these styles so that when you use a font, it's going to be blue or something. You know, you're going to use a color blue, and blue is going to be having certain characteristics associated with it. So here's some common CSS properties. Background color, specifying the background color of a document. Color, specifying the text color of an element. So here's where we get our color blue. Background dash color, colon blue. Nobody memorizes all this stuff, and you don't have to do that for this class either. But you're going to end up figuring out is what the common ones are, and then you'll just memorize those, and then you'll have a book, then you'll look up, or you go on the internet, and what's that style again, or what's that tag, and then you'll figure out what it is, and then you remember like maybe a handful of them, the ones you use most often. Margins, you're going to use probably margins a lot, actually. Font styles, font families. Text alignment is pretty popular. So alignment going to be centered, left, right. So that's just a sampling of some common CSS properties. So the properties that are available in CSS 1 are grouped into the following categories. So we have different versions of CSS. So the basic components would include the color and the background properties, font, text, box, and classification properties. To classify an element as a certain type of element, which comes in handy, because then you can take and say, well, this element belongs to this group, and so this group is classified as pink color, double-spaced, all these different things that are associated with it. So you take the grouping and you apply it to the entire section, usually in terms of dividing out the document into different regions or sections, and you apply different attributes to it. So this is CSS 1. CSS 2 is released in 1998. So this is pretty old, 1998. So the original one was mid-90s, 95-ish, 98. Then we have number 2. The number 2 builds on CSS 1. Well, think about HTML. That's been around for years as well. So we're commonly on 4, but we have 5 out. So we're on 2 CSS. So the properties themselves include new features such as table properties. Okay. Ability to change the appearance of the mouse pointer. And in fact, here's another thing for everyone who knows everything about HTML, came in today, I'm not going to learn anything new today. You can actually use HTML to change the mouse pointer, which is actually kind of cool for menus, because in fact I see this a lot actually. If you do an image map, you have the mouse over, mouse click. All the mouse events are part of the HTML document. So when you hover the mouse over, you change the pointer into a hand or something. But then you're guaranteeing, or hopefully guaranteeing, or you're hoping that the host operating system has this hand mouse pointer. If it doesn't, it's not going to show. So it's not reliable. So, and hopefully, the other thing too is wheel behavior, right mouse button, left mouse button. Again, you're relying upon the host operating system having this particular feature. So different mice for different platforms. So it might cause a problem. So CSS properties. So at the time of this writing, no web browser provides complete support for properties available in CSS2. Actually, they do now. So this is, I need to update this slide actually because they do. Not 100%, but they do. What does that mean? We still have incompatibilities with web browsers. Go figure. Still, which is kind of interesting. Inline styles. So the most basic method of applying styles is to use an inline style. We've seen this already, actually. It allows you to add style information to a single element or a document using a style element, so attribute. So use the style attribute, assign an inline style information to an element. So you assign the style attribute a property declaration enclosed in quotation marks. And then we have the CSS value. So the values that are assigned to the CSS property depend on the type of property. So the values are going to be in value, key, value, attribute kind of pairs. So some attributes can be assigned a range of values depending upon what we have, and some of them just have an on or an off, or use this or don't use this. Kind of like make bold, make underlined or something, versus font style or font type, which is where you have a variety of different things that we can assign to this particular property. So the values themselves, for instance, you can assign a font name that is available for a user system font family property. For other properties, you can assign a value for a specific set of values, you know, like a range of values, perhaps, maybe if it's for a region or for a size or something. And then we have length units. So if you're going to do a size, you're going to use the units. So it refers to the units of measure that can be used for a style declaration to determine size or the positioning of the element. So whether the length unit is used for sizing or positioning depends on the property and the element to which it's going to be assigned for. And so you're going to look in terms of pixels or length units that are going to be associated. That's going to be determined. And actually, the units themselves are defined by the CSS2 standard. So you assign measurements of values of properties, and number of represents a measurement immediately followed by the unit of measure. So you're going to say 1 inch, or 2 centimeters, or whatever happens to be the unit of measure that's going to be used. Then we have color units, which is kind of interesting. So they represent color values that can be assigned to a property. So you can assign color, predefined color, actually, units for a property using any number of one of 16 color names defined in CSS1. Blue, red, orange. I don't know what all 16 names are, but that's a couple of them, common ones. So here's some more. Aqua, gray. This is where you can get in font color equals silver. Well, they're defined by the CSS style declarations, so it's a predefined color, or you can come up with your own color, and then you're using an RGB scale. So you have 3 number values that you're going to associate with the number properties, values that are going to be associated with a declaration that's going to define a new color for you. So you can use your CSS to define colors, take those colors and add them to elements, to change properties on things. And so you're really building a hierarchy of components when you're doing this. So most graphical computer systems use what's called an RGB color system, and red, green, blue. So it specifies the colors. So you can also assign colors using RGB color system itself. So content versus the presentation. Most HTML tags define the content type independent of the presentation. So the style sheet is associated with the presentation that formats the elements. So the content, presentation, they're really 2 separate components. Traditionally, before CSS came along, they were used together. Now, the common trend is to separate them out. So what we're going to look at next is kind of some examples of putting all these pieces together. So using the formatting essentially with the content. So remembering that HTML style sheets are known as cascading style sheets, since they're defined at 3 different levels. So you want to know what the 3 different levels are. So 3 different levels of CSS. We have inline, which is going to be applying to the content of a single HTML element. Slow way of doing it, but if you want to make something different and you're only going to do it for that one element, then you do it in line. And it makes no sense to create an entry in the CSS file for it. Document style sheets apply to the whole body of the document. And then we have external style sheets that can be linked to applied to numerous different documents. And now, shortly in the next week or so, we're going to start looking at JavaScript and putting scripting languages in with HTML content with CSS. And the interesting thing is that, well, the CSS is only used for HTML. It doesn't really work with JavaScript at all. But you'll get into the habit of including external JavaScript files. It's going to have some functionality that you're going to run in the HTML code. If you're going to do that, you're going to put your CSS external as well. So you'll get, basically in the habit of separating things out, hopefully, and using them together. But keeping it all separated out makes it a little bit easier to organize and use the concepts. So lower level style sheets can override higher level style sheets, obviously. So here we go. Here's our inline style sheet example. And the stuff is in red is our style tags. And let me make this a little bit bigger so you can sort of see it. So style is equal to font family Arial, comma, sans serif, colon, text alignment. It's going to be colon. So we're still having the same syntax, but we're using a style attribute. And we're saying font family colon Arial, and we're separating them out the separate values out by commas. Because then we can say, this is the family, meaning one of these, whatever's available. When you specify, and this is a good example actually of fonts, when you specify one font, you're relying upon that font being available. And if the font's not available, like any of these other styles that you're going to run into, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to look like you didn't put it in there at all. So using style attribute, you can specify out the presentation style for a single element. So you put it within the tag, and you list a sequence of property value pairs separated by commas. So here's some examples on the right-hand side of different ways of doing it. We have 2 numbered values for the color for RGB, so we have 6 total numbers that we're putting in here. If we're going to assign a number that's associated with the color. Or we can assign a regular color like red, blue, one of the 16 defined colors. And here we have 1, 2, looks like 3 different tags. So you see it's put inside of the particular element itself. This is what's called inline. If you cut and paste this, put it into a text file, run it, you'll see the styles applied toward each one. Only problem is if it's something has changed, you say, I don't like Arial anymore. Everything should be Times Roman. Then you got to go through every single one of the pages and maybe do a search or something on Arial and then manually change it to Times Roman. Not so good for global application. It is good if you have one little piece here and you just want to make it italic or something, or you want to add the style in, you want to apply something to something inconsistently, then you're going to use the inline technique. Here's more style properties to further the example a little bit more here, where we're going to take the style here for the image, and we're going to have and here's actually an example of putting in the value of 0.3 inches. IN is the abbreviation. These are predefined, middle, center, left, right, or within inside of the CSS2 language. You have predefined definitions, like same thing as the colors themselves. The upper, I'm putting something in uppercase, lowercase, upper character, lower. Looking at the contents of a square, looking at, in fact, in this particular box that we're creating for the text, we're going to do it pre, which means we're not going to format it. Everything's going to appear as is. So this is why we have spaces in here, actually, because this is going to appear as is. So this is actually not a bad one to take a look at, actually. This one is number, I want the one that says pre on it. Oh, it is this one here. Oh, thought I had my text editor up here. I should take and copy and paste these and put them in text files, but I lose them all. Oh, that's a bad example of, well, let's just see. Just save it here. That example of formatted text. Here we go. So yeah, this is the effect of the pre. It kind of puts it with the spaces in here. But I can see kind of a, well, there's no image, which is kind of interesting. Here's the image. Well, there's no image, which is why it kind of went out this way. But here's something embedded in text, but I don't have the image out. If I change the image name, perhaps that would help the example a little bit. Nah, I'm not going to bother editing this because it word wrapped and it's going to take too much time. It's going to be boring. So let me just finish up with the examples. So let's see, because we're almost done here. Alright, so we're going to have plenty of CSS examples as we go through as well. But just showing you the different techniques to move on to the next one. What we're looking at then, if we're not going to do it inline, then we are going to do it document style. So this other example, the second one here on the inline styles, there's 3 examples total for inline. The second one's a little bit showing you a little bit more of the text. The third one is showing you style sheets are applied to a table of interesting effects. So in the third example here, the style sheet is applied towards the table, so everything in the table will be associated with these different styles, versus this one here, which is applying it towards an image tag element, and then also for a list and some other, and then this one here is just taking some random styles and associating it with different paragraphs. So the interesting thing with an inline is if you have a table, and in the table you want to change the font size to make it smaller so the table appears smaller or something of that nature, then it makes sense to apply the style to the table instead of applying it like individually to each one of the table items or something. So then we have document style sheets. So inline style sheets apply to individual elements in the page in terms of the concept can lead to inconsistencies, as I mentioned before. Similar elements are formatted differently, like H1 element might be centered. So when we put things in line, unless we're applying it towards an entire table or something, we're going to lead ourselves naturally to inconsistencies. So the document is a higher level in the hierarchy. It came out and said, well, we'll just put it on the entire document. So inline definitions mix content with presentation, violates the philosophy. So an alternative style would be to use the document style sheets, allow for a cleaner separation of the content and presentation. So the style definitions are placed in the head section of the page within the style tag. So we're still using, anytime you're going to use a style of any nature, you're going to use the style tag, whether you're putting it inline, putting it in the document, or putting it external. So you can apply all elements or a subclass of elements throughout the page. So here it is up here, and this is why, and this is the first example where we've seen where we need a head section. Because in some of the previous examples I gave you, we can put the title and the body, we can put a lot of the head stuff elsewhere. This concept doesn't work if we put it elsewhere. It only works in the head section. In fact, we're probably going to want to use a head section in every single one of our documents, especially if we're going to put JavaScript or something in there. So here we have the title, which belongs in the head, and then underneath it we have style type, and then we're setting the type of the style to text CSS, saying we're defining a CSS style. And we're going to say H1, which is going to be our header number 1. It's going to be the blue, and it's going to be centered. So we're changing the look and feel for it. And then we're going to go p.indented is going to be 0.2 instead of 0.5 spaces. And then we're closing the style. If we put this here, it applies towards every time we use an H1 and every time we use a P. Which means we don't have to go through each one of the individual elements and say, okay, for this P, for this P, for this H1. So this saves us a lot of time and energy. We're using it at the document level. We're going to do this for a form, for a special document inside of the website. We're going to use the inline when it's just one little paragraph. We need it indented a little bit more. We need to change something, right? So the number of times we're going to use this is going to be a little bit higher than the number of times we're going to use an inline. So inline is last resort. You can't fix it any other way. This is, okay, special page. The next one is going to be the one you're going to use more universally. But so here we have the document style up at the top. Ensures the entire document is formatted that way. Can even define subclasses of elements and specify formatting for that. So p.indented defines a subclass of paragraphs. So in here it's all of the defaults. So if p adds a new feature, the indentation. To specify the newly defined class, you place the class ID attribute in the tag. So, and note how clean the body is here. And here it is, p space class is equal to indented. So just so you know what we're talking about here. In fact, this you can use if you put it here or if you put it outside into another document. You're using the same kind of syntax. So here we've defined p.indented, which is an indented paragraph, instead of it being left flush. And here we're saying p class is equal to indented. So this paragraph is going to be indented. So it's going to follow this tag. Normally we see this with div tags. Div class is equal to definitions or something, or I don't know, the name of the tag that you created that's going to specially format something to look a certain way. You're going to apply it to each one of the sections of the document so you can get more consistency. This is the syntax you're going to use to add in the classes of what it is that you're defining. So mix and you can actually mix and match. You can put inline stuff in here as well. It doesn't have to all be just, but prevents clutter, creates a cleaner document, cleaner body look to it. So here's a little bit more on the example. Document styles are especially useful for formatting tables. Here's another table example where we've got a table, and then we're just going to use the table here with the caption and with the particular items that we're going to put into just table rows here. So it effectively separates the content from the presentation. So what if we wanted to write just the column of the numbers? Well, we could put it in manually in line. And what if we changed our mind? Well, we could take it out. So it's easier to put something in line and then take it out than it is to define this is what a table is going to look like. And then when we use a table, it's always going to look like this. We have to constantly overwrite something. So there's pros and cons using both techniques. Pseudo-elements. Pseudo-elements, well, that's interesting. So pseudo-elements are used to address subparts of elements. So you can specify appearances of links, of a link in various different tasks. For example, visited, hovered, active. So when you move the mouse over, if you visited the link before, actually without moving the mouse over, a visited link is going to have a different color to it than a non-visited one versus an active one versus a hovering one. So you can specify the format for the first line of the first line in the page of a paragraph, first line. You can specify the element or the format of the first letter in the page or the format, first letter. Have you ever seen those websites where like you have a paragraph and the first letter or the first word is like really big? This is how you would actually set the attributes. In fact, you'd set it so it all looked the same. So every time you started out a new paragraph, there we go, the first character is like really big, or the first word is big or something. Danger of changing the look of the familiar elements is confusing. Yes, when you change an underline into, or you change text into underline and it's not a link, it might appear to be a link, but it's not a link, so you're going to confuse. Or you have behavior where you put the mouse, hover it over a link, and it turns not into a link anymore. You know, it puts it back into text, removes the underline or something. Then essentially you're going to confuse the user. But here we go with our example. So here we have A dot, this is for the link, visited, active, hover, P dot first letter. So these are called pseudo elements because they are creating elements that we're applying particular style to that's part of a sub element. So they're pseudo elements. So if we just use this here, put the style in here for all of the A's, and this is for the P for character, then we take a look at here, welcome to my web page, I'm so happy you're here. Well, this is just a P. Be sure to visit, here's the link, and if we take a look at that, actually this is probably not a, this is actually a pretty good one. This is a pretty good one to look at. You can see how the formatting actually just automatically appears for us. Hopefully it'll paste correctly. Ah, look at that, it does. Okay, so test 5, 6 times. So we have CNN here that turned into a link, but there's no underline anymore. So the visited is black, orange, and well, let's see, orange, blue, interesting, and red. Well, I see the red here. So if I click on CNN, it now turns back here into black. So I've changed the characteristic of the link, of the anchor here. I don't see the orange. Was that supposed to be orange? Visited is black. Hovered over, now it's blue. So the hover, hover, is blue. It was red because it was, well, let's see. There's no way of seeing it active. So originally, this is visited now, so it's visited because I clicked on it, so now it turned to black. Before it was, I guess that was a red color before. So it was because it was fresh, it wasn't visited. So actually the CNN works. That's good. The paragraph itself doesn't necessarily have, it's just this anchor here. First letter, font size large. This is supposed to be large, I guess. Yeah. Maybe extra large might make it look a little different. So it's hard to tell that that's large, but it's supposed to be large. So you can see it's put in terms of the styles defined up here. We just use our regular old elements down here, and it applies those changed attributes. Only for this document. So it's kind of limited just to the scope of the document itself, which is not a bad idea when you want it to apply just to the document. Let's get in there. Let's see. So the last but not least is the way that most people will do it is make it external, put it into a separate file, and then include the file in. But if you have that special page, you don't necessarily want to create a separate file. You know, if it's just going to be like a form or something that you're going to create. Pseudo column. So external, last but not least, the way of doing it. Modularity. It gives us modularity. We create one external file. We put that file in everything. It has all of our tags in it. Only problem with that is we have to redefine and create new different tags for each one of the different slight variations that we're going to create. The file can get kind of big. No problem, though. It's just a text file. It doesn't slow down any of the loading of the page. The only problem that usually happens with that is if the file is not available. The file goes away. All of a sudden, all of the formatting on your entire site is gone. So it's a little vulnerable in terms of the availability of that file. Hopefully it won't get destroyed or lost or something. So the modularity in terms of the design and the implement, tests, useful routines for classes, package and make available for reuse, saves in development time and costs, central libraries make it possible to make a single change and propagate it throughout. So your company decided they're going to change their colors of their site now. Instead of being green and white, we're going to be, this is what ITU did. We used to be green and white, now we're red and white, I think. So now we can just take green and change it to red in one line of code, and our entire website could be transformed in minutes, right? Well, not really, but it could have if it was designed that way. So external style sheets take the style definitions and then put them into a separate file. You still load it, but you don't, instead of putting it into the head section of the document, you load the file in. So multiple pages can be linked to the same style sheet. It gives you a consistent look and feel, possible to make a single change, propagate out automatically, represents the ultimate in content representation, separation. There is no requirement, and this is the other thing, so if you say, oh, I already know all this stuff, there's no requirement, actually, believe it or not, trivial piece here, to call it a .css. You can call it my something. But if you don't call it CSS, people don't know it's a CSS. It's kind of like how, you know, there's no requirement to put a TXT extension on files in some operating systems, but people do that. They say, oh, it's text. So, yeah, no, you don't have to call it a CSS, but here's my style CSS. This is the same stuff we looked at in all of the different techniques. The style tags are the style tags. So once you learn the style tag format, which you're going to need to do for this class, then you just put them in the document, put them in line, or put them in a separate file. If you're putting them in a separate file, there's nothing. In fact, you can put comments in there if you want. This is for the paragraphs. This is for the such and such section. That's helpful, because then when you look at the CSS, you go, well, what is that supposed to be for? What is that tag? And then, you know, it's just one big all long list. So if you separate it out into sections, group them together, you know, this is all the fonts, this is all the colors, then you can actually kind of find things easier, because what people are going to do is they're going to use the CSS, hopefully. They're going to take, maybe print it out, and kind of go, well, what tag am I supposed to, you know, what style am I supposed to apply to this? And then you're using the styles inside of the document to specify certain things. So here's an example here, and this is basically the hyper reference to my style.css. It's going to be a type, and what we're looking at here is we're including a link to this style sheet as a type, a document type that's going to be associated with this. Type is going to be a text CSS, same as before. Here's the name of the file, and we're going to put the file in the same location. It doesn't have to be. If it isn't, then we specify the absolute instead of the relative, or we specify the relative associated with the location. And then the title is going to be my style. So down here on the bottom, I can say p.class indented. Same concept as before, but instead of putting the styles in here, we put them out here. Makes it easier to read. Only problem is you can't see what's in here until you open this up. So this is our separate file here. This is a separate file. I'll separate it out. So ideally, the developer of the website would place the formatted options in the external style sheet. And then all the web pages, all the links to the same style should look uniform, should look the same. So it specifies the web page since it only needs to specify the structure of the content of the tag. So. And you don't have to use all these tags. The only problem is if you have redefined something like H1 and you use H1 out here and this is included, it's automatically going to be included. So the way you get around that is you put an inline style sheet. So you use the external style sheet. Actually, I've seen all three used together successfully. External style sheet, document style sheet for special forms and things that might be in the document. And then, I don't want this H1 to look like this, inline style. So you can use all three of them together. It's called cascading because one's going to override the other. The way you learn how the cascading works is the closest to the element, the higher the priority. So anything here is going to go first. Anything here is going to go second. Anything here is going to go third. Anything in the browser is going to go fourth. So if you don't specify anything, the browser is going to take care of it. So if you don't put it in here, document, not the document, oh, CSS, no. So it's just going to look for it. Why they made it cascading is because it gives you the ultimate flexibility. You can put it anywhere you want. Only problem is it confuses people when they use too much of the cascading. It's really hard to find, well, where did that get changed? How to show the creation date and the URL information. So this is a couple little tidbits to leave you with as well. So for your assignment, you need to show, this is the second assignment, I believe, but I'll take a look at it. Maybe the third. I don't know. One of them in there is going to have you show the date and the URL of the website. Remember those old assignments that used to be able to old websites that used to say creation date on the bottom. You can actually show that stuff automatically. It comes in handy, especially when you know you've replaced something. But how come it's showing last year? You know. And then you know, oh, I replaced the wrong file or something. It's used for troubleshooting, essentially. Also the URL, where did this thing come from? So the page's location and last modification date should automatically be displayed at the bottom and when you run this page here. So you can view the source of the web page and cut and paste the appropriate text and make it, in order to accomplish this task here. In fact, I think this is probably the last slide. It is, so I'll go up and I'll show you, I'll end you with this kind of concept. Oh good, so let's take a look here. Oh, this is using JavaScript actually. So let me show you what we're going to be doing next. Let's call it text 8. So text 8 is showing me the location. It's not showing me the creation date, it's showing me the location, which is kind of interesting. Unless it's on the bottom. Nope, it's not. Oh, here it is. Here's the creation date. Is over here. Today, I believe, is the 26th, and it is 11:38. So I just created that file a few minutes ago. So it's hard to see it unless I make the web browser smaller. Then you can kind of see. There we go. Oops. Hello. So this code that is doing it is over here, and it is using JavaScript. So this is actually kind of another example, although I'm not going to get into JavaScript today. That's going to be our next topic coming up soon. Because HTML is great and CSS is great, but we're going to apply it towards a scripting language as well to see it all work together. So it's not a JavaScript programming course, by the way. And I'm going to give you all the formulas and all the things you need to do for the JavaScripts. But it's nice to be able to incorporate scripts, and JavaScript is one of the easiest ones out there, inside of your HTML and your CSS, because then you can get functionality. HTML, CSS is static, JavaScript's dynamic. So if you want your forms, and we can't look at forms and stuff without looking at something like JavaScript or something in order to, I mean, we have on-click behavior for a button, but we want it to do something. So JavaScript will give us some functionality, some dynamic behavior. And you're going to want to know JavaScript anyway, because eventually you're going to want to hopefully do this, you know, make it more dynamic. But here we have the document location and the document.last modified. And I believe fairly soon in the lecture set I'm going to be going over the document object model. This is where it's coming from. So these are properties that are associated with, or attributes, excuse me, that are associated with the document. Each document is an object. Actually, JavaScript is object-oriented as well. But the document object model is object-oriented, and each one of the elements, and this would be the document. We also have the window elements. We have components, subcomponents of the document, actually. Each one of our elements that we're sticking in our HTML turns into an element. But long story short, we can run a property, we can get at an attribute that is associated with the object, and this one would be, as an example, the location. So this particular code is doing a document write, which is a method to say write to this document screen. This content, and this content is going to be formatted this way with an inline. That's not even a style, it's just going to be a regular old HTML. Font size is equal to this. Put it in italic, and then put in the document.location, and then over here we're putting in the last modified date as another component. So, and this is kind of interesting because we have it inside a script tag, and the script is using JavaScript. So in script space language is equal to JavaScript. And we're not really doing very much in this outside of doing a document write. And then we're not actually, this is going to be inside of a table. This is inside of a table tag. So this is really overkill for what it really is doing. But it's just showing you a combination of some things put together. So a concluding thought actually that goes along with style sheets is, if you remember the hierarchy of the 3 kind of levels, plus if you count the web browser, that's really 4 levels of functionality for cascading style sheets. We have the same concept with scripts. We can put the script, in fact this is an inline script. The script itself is written using a script tag inside of a table, actually, inside of HTML, so embedded inline. We can also put the scripts in the head section of the document and then call functions that we have defined, or objects that we have defined. Or we can stick them outside just the same way as the style sheets, and then in the head section of the document import it in. Use the style sheet, use the script file. So when we go through the scripting, we'll see it the same way and how it's added into the HTML file. So. Alright, well we accomplished what we needed to accomplish today. A little overview of CSS. Hopefully you're working on the assignments. Next week I will be moving on to bigger and better topics as well. So make sure to sign the attendance list. Woman's in the back of the, for the TA, in the back of the room. So, unless we have any questions, comments, or concerns. Nope, we're done for today. Enjoy your lunch.